Hey everybody, I hope you can hear me okay. Now, this is our third day. After yesterday's hike, we decided to have a little bit of a rest day. So we've come out to an area that Nick discovered a few days ago. It's not far from the road or where we're staying actually. It's this beautiful woodland. It's all these twisted oaks with lots of mossy boulders. The light is fading really fast, so finding a composition this fast is a little tricky. But I think I found a nice composition down here. I'm just going to stick with this one composition until I think I've got it right, and then try and move on to something else. But I don't think the light is going to last that long. But what I love about this composition is that we have these two dominant oaks in the middle here, and then there's another one in the middle, and then we have some twisted kind of deadfall. And I've tried to maneuver myself so that everything has its place. It's not overlapped by any one subject. So we have the deadfall that has its place. It's not kind of hiding behind anything. And then the two main oaks, and then the central one in the back. And then on the side there, it starts to get a little messy, but I think it'll work. And I've also included this kind of twisted bit of deadfall here. The background is really nicely backlit, so it works quite well. But like I said, the light is fading really fast, so I'm going to have to take some shots quick before it's gone. But yeah, it's just absolutely beautiful in here. This is my kind of photography. Hopefully I can come here again because I think there's a lot of potential here. It's funny, one of the most common comments I get on my channel is how lucky I am to live on Vancouver Island and the forests that we have over there. And it's true, I am very lucky to live on the island and photograph on the island. But I've got to be honest with you, after visiting the UK and checking out some of the little forests that I saw, you guys are pretty lucky over there too. The deciduous forests are just absolutely beautiful. The trees just seem to have so much life and character to them as compared to the conifer forests that we have in British Columbia here. The thing is that most conifer forests, the trees are very straight. They don't have an awful lot of character except for some of the really old trees in old growth forest. And that's part of the problem. We don't have an awful lot of old growth forest left. And photographing in deep dark woods with a lot of straight conifers, especially second growth, is not awe-inspiring at all. Now these little trees here, these little oaks with the boulders covered in moss and all the different shapes, I just found to be wonderful. The one thing that struck me the most about the deciduous forests in the UK was all of the room that a lot of the trees have or seem to have around them. There's not a lot of chaos or deadfall surrounding these trees, and that really makes photography quite a bit easier. I found it easier anyway. I mean, it could be just the fact that, you know, it's new, it's exciting for me, whereas compared to photographing the island, even though I really enjoy it, after a while you kind of get a bit jaded about photographing the same old all the time. So it was really refreshing to photograph in these forests. Now, as far as the compositions go, as predicted, the light didn't last very long at all, so I stuck with this composition that I have here, and I just made a couple of variations. So I have the average view, and then I also did a panorama that I quite like, that you're seeing right now. Good morning, everybody. So Gavin, Nick and I have come back to the twisted oak forest that we found yesterday, and I've got to admit I'm having a really hard time this morning. Last night, I mean, I had a hard time last night as well, but the light was really beautiful last night, especially the last half hour or so. And I think I managed to get one good shot. Now we've come out this morning. Now this area doesn't get morning light. There's a hillside behind here, so we came out here quite late, around 7:30, 8 o'clock, and the light is just skimming some of the mossy rocks here. But I gotta be honest with you, it doesn't quite work for me. It looks quite busy. What I'm looking for are areas where the light is hitting. I'm not looking so much for certain trees or anything like that. I'm looking for compositions that fit the light. So what I mean by that is I might see a beam or a sliver of light come through the forest and hit some rocks, and that's what I'll base my composition on. So I'm basing it on the light, not so much the trees, and then try and fit those trees within that light. And that's the hard part, because it's such a chaotic little forest. It's hard to get those trees to kind of go with the light, if that makes sense. So I keep walking around and around this small area because the light keeps changing constantly. I think I'll find something eventually, but it's tedious. Just say, isn't that right, Gavin? Just say yes.
Whatever it is that you said, yes. I tell you what, I'd give my left kidney for some fog.
Yes, this area would be absolutely incredible if there was fog, that's for sure. But not today.
Well, keep trucking, eh?
Yep. Alright, after wandering around for probably about 40 minutes, I finally found a composition that I like. The only problem is I think that the light might be getting a little bit harsh. We have some beautiful backlit bracken ferns back here, and that's what really makes the photograph. But like I said, it's getting a little contrasty, just a bit too harsh, not very soft, but I'll give it a go anyway. I like the composition because we have this dominant tree in the foreground here, this one right here, and then we have another one just behind it that's twisting into the frame, so that kind of keeps your eye into the frame. And then we have another two that I've made sure I keep in the frame. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 dominant trees that are well separated in the frame, and then of course the backlit ferns, and there's some beautiful boulders in here all covered in moss. I might back up a little bit as well and include this tree in one of my compositions. The thing that I'm not that keen on this tree is that it's quite straight. Because it's straight, it doesn't really fit in with the curvy oaks, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's just the light. I'm going to have to fiddle with this in Photoshop, I think, and warm it up as well, because it's doesn't have a very warm tone to it. It's quite cool looking because it's a cloudless day today. No cloud in sight, so it has that ambient blue cast in the shadows especially. Okay, now I almost gave up on this photograph and I wasn't going to put it in the video, but then I thought, you know what, it's a good idea to kind of show my failures as well as my successes, because I think a lot of people learn from those mistakes or the images that don't work out. Now, as far as composition goes, I quite like the composition. I like the twisted nature of these oaks, and I think they interplay with one another quite well, especially the foreground tree and the oak on the right hand side in the background kind of curves back into the frame. And then we have those other two oaks in the background, and then finally the straighter one on the left side. Now, the space in the bottom left is a little bit empty, but I still think it quite works. What's failing this image for me is the light. The light was just too harsh and too contrasty. As far as exposure goes, I exposed for the highlights. So when I got the raw file, it was underexposed, as you can see here. And then I just lightened it up and tried to flatten out the image as much as possible. The problem that you face when you flatten out an image when it comes to contrast is that the image ends up looking like it's flat or HDR. has that kind of weird effect where the highlights are perfect exposure and the shadows are a perfect exposure. It just doesn't quite work. So what I ended up doing was actually overexposing the highlights a little bit just to make it look a little bit more realistic. So we've come down to a little spot called Isle Falls. It's a 3 or 4 tiered waterfall. We have these kind of twisted oak trees. Now the upper falls, we just spent a bit of time up there and it was really difficult to photograph. It was really beautiful. We've got these oaks kind of overhanging the stream there with a nice little falls in the background. But man, I found it really hard to photograph. So we've come down to the second tier here and I think I found a really good composition. So what I've tried to do is place this twisted oak tree in the foreground and kind of frame the waterfall. So there are a number of things here that are kind of important to me, so I'll go over them with you right now. I'll just show you what I have on the back of my camera and kind of give you my reasons of why I've composed it this way. So you can see the waterfall in the background here, and what I've tried to do is I really love the reflection of the waterfall, but I didn't want this branch in the foreground here to kind of intersect with it. So I've moved my camera over to the right, and then we have this beautiful sweeping line of the oak tree that kind of goes all the way around, and you'll notice that the thinner one in the background here kind of curls back on itself towards the waterfall. And then also these rocks here, I didn't want to intersect those either. It sounds really kind of a bit nitpicky, but I find that the small things all added up. They really improve the photograph if you concentrate on all the little details. There's also a branch up here that you can't quite see, but they all seem to frame the waterfall in the background quite nicely. And I've also put on a breakthrough photography circular polarizer just to kind of cut down on the glare just a little bit, especially in the rocks around the waterfall, because there's quite a bit of sheen on the rocks. So I want it to really stand out. I mean, as usual, it looks quite good on the back of the camera, but we'll have to see when we open it up in the computer. I'll probably have to do quite a bit of dodging and burning. I'll probably burn in the corners here and draw your attention more to the center here, because the waterfall is definitely the center of interest. I'm quite happy with the way that this photograph turned out. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this is not in-your-face epic, and the light definitely wasn't terribly interesting. It was quite flat, but it works well for this subject matter. And these types of scenes really kind of resonate with me. I really like the quieter moments in nature over the overly dramatic. I've said this a number of times, and it's just a personal thing. As much as I enjoy getting up early or staying up late at night to photograph dramatic light, these types of scenes I really enjoy photographing. There's no rush to put them together. and it gives me lots of time to kind of move around and think of different ways to compose these types of shots. Now, some of the details that I was kind of fussing over in my little spiel there, I didn't actually need, but again, I will say that some of those things end up being quite important. One of the ones that I was talking about were the rocks in the bottom left corner there. I ended up cropping them out because I actually prefer this more 4x5 format crop over the regular format of the 35mm. Now, as far as processing goes, I didn't do an awful lot other than I brightened up the oak tree considerably in the foreground, and I kind of darkened the edges again to try and bring your attention towards the little waterfall in the center. You'll also notice that I've been quite careful in trying to make sure that the water itself is the brightest part of the whole frame, because your eye goes straight to the brightest section in any photograph, and in this case it's the waterfall, and that's the most important part of this image for me. Now, I have seen other images of this waterfall, and this is a particularly dry year in Scotland. I couldn't believe how little water there was running, so I would imagine that in a wet year this would be just raging, and it would be interesting to see how it would work in this composition. Alright everybody, I think that's going to be it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video as always. If you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. Next week we'll continue our journey around the Isle of Mull. Until then, bye for now.